Hi book lovers, welcome back to my channel. I have been talking about how I've been reading all of Julia Quinn's backlist, and I have finally finished 30 plus books later. 3 months later, I started back in December 2020. I am done with all of her books. After I read all of Bridgerton back in December to prepare for the Netflix show, I decided, hey, let's just read the rest of her books. It took a while and it took me a wide range of readings from me, but today I'm going to be talking about all 30 something books by Julia Quinn. This isn't technically going to be a guide to Julia Quinn. I'll put out a video like that, like I did for my guide to Lacey video. I'll be doing a guide separate from this, like talking about my favorites, what books or what series to start with. I'll be making that video sometime later, but today I'm going to be talking about all the good stuff and all the bad stuff from Julia Quinn. She has 8 total series and I'll be talking about them in publication date order. She does not have any standalones unless you want to count her novellas and her anthologies. All of her full-length books are part of some sort of series. She has 32 full-length books, including that Bridgerton Happily Ever After bind-up, and she has 6 novellas that are part of 6 different anthologies. I do have quite the Julia Quinn paperback collection. I do believe I own all of her originals, the ones with the step backs and the illustrated back covers. I don't own every single one of her books, and I don't think I really want to, but I have all the originals and that's good enough for me. I've got my Bridgerton inspired t-shirt from Hello Lovely Box with the Duke and Duchess of Hastings, so let's just dive into every single book by Julia Quinn. The first series that I'm going to be talking about is her very first published series, and that is her Splendid trilogy. These are all historical romances. She has yet to write anything that is not historical romance. Her first published book, her debut, was Splendid, which published back in 1995, and this is the original cover. The series overall for me is like 3 to 3.5 stars. It's an okay start. It's definitely not Julia Quinn's best, and she has since improved since 1995. It is cute, very lighthearted, similar in vibes to Bridgerton, if that's the series that you're most familiar with, but nothing about the series really stood out to me, so it's a fairly okay series. Fun to read, but nothing all that exciting. Book 1, Splendid, I gave 3 stars to. We have an American heiress heroine and a Duke hero. This one actually had a pretty promising start because of the meet cute. When Emma and Alex first meet, Alex actually thinks that Emma is a maid. She's wearing her maid's clothes, doing a chore for her, and that's when she saves the Duke's nephew's life. Alex is enchanted by this maid. He is pretty much ready to give up all his duties to be with this maid. Luckily for Alex, he doesn't have to spurn society because Emma is a very wealthy heiress. Emma actually really wants to go back home to America to take over her father's company. So I did like Emma's character. Alex, on the other hand, I didn't love him, I didn't hate him. He was just kind of there. The romance though is fairly average. Nothing about it really stood out to me. It's cute for the most part, but the beginning, the meet cute, was definitely the best part about this book for me. Book 2, Dancing in Midnight, was my favorite of the series, though still not the best, and this is what the original cover looks like. This one I gave 3.5 stars to, and that's mainly because of our scarred, broody, tortured hero. I'm always a sucker for those kinds of heroes, and John is Julia Quinn's very first broody, tortured hero. The heroine, Arabella, is the cousin to the heroine from the first book, from Splendid. She meets the new neighbor, John, who is a wounded war hero. He has a damaged leg from war. This is your classic romance where the tortured hero doesn't think that he's good enough for the heroine. She is the light in his life. John pushes Arabella away. Arabella never gives up on him. It's a very, very sweet read. If you're a fan of wounded heroes, I would recommend giving this one a try. This is also the first book where the Smythe Smiths are mentioned for the very first time. The Smythe Smiths are basically a running joke throughout all of Julia Quinn's books. And Minx is the third and final book in the Splendid trilogy with this adorable cover. The hero, William, has been a secondary character in the first 2 books. He is everyone's friend and also the biggest player. I remember going into this one, I was so excited because of the whole guardian ward trope in this romance. I was so ready to give this one 4 stars for it to be my favorite of the series, but then something really dumb happens at the end that lowered this one to 3 stars. With the guardian ward trope, William has just inherited a new property and a ward to go along with it. He's all ready to help prepare this ward for her entrance into society, to become the belle of the ball, get her married off, and then out of his hands. So he is very surprised when this ward is actually the estate estate manager of his new property. She is a tomboy, she loves wearing pants rather than dresses. William and Henrietta, also known as Henry, have some fantastic banter together. They are so much fun, mainly because they don't really know what to do with the other person. The romance is super cute. There's a slight forbidden aspect to it with him being her guardian. I was very surprised in this book when there was a mention of a beehive, because that's the whole premise of the Bridgerton series, with Henry being very physically active and familiar with the outdoors. When William and Henry come across this beehive, she sticks her hand right into it and it terrifies William. William literally says that he's seen men die from a bee sting, which got me really curious, especially after having read the Bridgertons, if that was inspiration for Julia Quinn to write about the Bridgerton father dying from a bee sting. Another little connection about this book is that William is actually cousins with the Smythe-Smith family. So the book overall was going really well. I was so ready to give this one 4 stars, and then the ending with the whole miscommunication thing happens. She sees something that she misinterprets. It causes all this dumb drama. I got so annoyed with this ending, so unfortunately this one could have been a favorite, but it wasn't. Still, it is pretty good disregarding that part, and maybe if you go into it knowing about the ending, you'd still enjoy it a lot more. The next series is a duology. This one is the Linden Sisters series, and one of my favorite series from Julia Quinn. Overall, the series was 4 stars for me. I gave both of them 4 stars. Book 1 is Everything and the Moon, and it's got this beautiful back cover. Book 2 is Brighter Than the Sun, and it's got this adorable back cover with the swing. I enjoyed the series so much. It's about these 2 sisters. First one is a second chance romance. The second one is a marriage of convenience. Both of them just worked out so well for me. They were fun and entertaining. I loved our heroines. I love their heroes. Book 1, because it's a second chance romance, it's got a bit of angst, but it's also got a lot of fun that Julia Quinn is good at writing. And then book 2 is just so adorable. So book 1, Everything in the Moon, like I said, is a second chance romance. Victoria and Robert fall in love at first sight. Robert is an earl, Victoria is the daughter of a vicar, so they're from 2 different classes of society, but they fall in love instantly. They sneak out at night together and they plan to run off to Scotland to get married. Unfortunately, the night that Victoria is supposed to sneak away, her father discovers her and ties her to her bed. Robert goes to investigate what's going on. Why isn't Victoria coming with me? He sees her and believes that she's just completely disregarded him. This is a reason for their 7-year-long separation, and they reunite at a house party where Robert is attending and Victoria is a governess. Robert wants revenge against Victoria, but it really doesn't go anywhere because Robert is still very much in love with Victoria. It's a really good second chance romance. I mean, if you don't mind insta love and a bit of miscommunication, there is some good angst, but it's still a Julia Quinn book, which means it is still fun and lighthearted. Also, there's a slight connection in this book with a previous series. Alex from Splendid book 1 is mentioned in Everything in the Moon. Book 2, Brighter Than the Sun, was unbelievably adorable. We have the younger of the Linden sisters, Ellie. She ends up in a marriage of convenience with Charles, who is another earl. This book had one of the most fun meet-cutes that I read from Julia Quinn. Charles literally falls down at Ellie's feet at their first meeting. He's quite drunk. He's feeling the after effects of his late night drinking. He falls from a tree right on top of Ellie's feet. He's drinking because he's discovered that he needs a bride before his 30th birthday or he'll lose his fortune. Lucky for him, Ellie needs a husband, otherwise her future stepmother is gonna force her to marry one of the terrible men she has picked out. They both get something out of this marriage of convenience, even though Ellie did want to marry for love and Charles is just the biggest rake. It's a really sweet romance. I loved seeing Ellie and Charles navigate how to be husband and wife and just make this marriage work for them. There is a bit of random suspense, especially towards the end, which I didn't really care for, but it didn't detract from the rest of the story. So overall, it was really great. Her next series is the Agents of the Crown series, another 2-book series. This one has a concept that I was so excited to read about. The heroes are both agents of the crown, spies. I will say though, it is a bit hard to give this one an average rating because I really loved one and I really did not love one. Book 1 is To Catch an Heiress and it's got this back cover. I love the blues and purples. This one was one that I did not enjoy. I gave this one 2 stars. It's enemies to lovers, and I've discovered after reading so many Julia Quinn books, I do not like her enemies to lovers romances. The arguments in this book and the rest of her enemies to lovers books were just so childish. Here, Caroline and Blake just constantly kept arguing and acting like children. I will say though, the setup of this one was really great. I love the premise. It opens up with Caroline about to get raped by her guardian's son, but she's just being really casual about it. She's been wanting to escape from her guardian from a long time, and she sees that this is her final opportunity to do so. Unfortunately for her, our spy hero Blake believes that Caroline is this infamous Spanish spy who's working against the English crown, so he kidnaps Caroline. Caroline is so confused at first. I mean, obviously she's being kidnapped. She has no idea why, but I did think that it was hilarious that Caroline saw this as an opportunity to get even further away from her guardian, so she does let Blake take her away. Sadly, this is when things went downhill for me. I did not like the banter. It just got on my nerves so much. Caroline also falls in love with Blake for no reason that I saw. He doesn't really do anything loving to make her fall in love with him besides keeping her fed and well rested as his kidnappee. So this book unfortunately was 2 stars for me. How to Marry a Marquis, on the other hand, was so much better. I give this one 4.5 stars. So good. The hero James is a Marquis. He is a fellow friend and spy of Blake's from book 1. This is what the back cover looks like. This one didn't have as much intrigue and suspense as book 1, but I still loved it. This book actually has a huge connection to Lady Danbury, who was a recurring character in the Bridgerton series. James is Lady Danbury's nephew and Elizabeth is her companion. They meet when Lady Danbury tells James that she has a blackmailer and she needs him to help her figure it out. Elizabeth, the heroine, is in charge of her 3 younger siblings and they are running out of money. So Elizabeth needs to find a husband, especially one with money, in order to save her family. She comes across this book called How to Marry a Marquis at Lady Danbury's house. This book is hilarious, especially when Elizabeth's younger siblings get a hold of it. So Elizabeth is ready to sacrifice herself in order to marry a wealthy man she doesn't love in order to save her family. When she meets James, even though she wants him, she can't set her eyes on him. She can't marry him because he's made her think that he's only an estate manager and not a marquis, which he really is. Elizabeth is a strong heroine. She's been through so much with the death of her parents and having to support her younger siblings. James is so sweet, so charming. I love them together, and I also loved Lady Danbury here. She is just as meddlesome and confident and hilarious as she was in the Bridgerton series. She has a hilarious cat named Malcolm who causes so much mess. Even Elizabeth's younger siblings were so adorable and fun. It was just a really great read. Loved it, especially after the mess that was book 1. Also, the hero from Minx was mentioned here and he causes a little bit of jealousy, and I think it's the first time I discovered that Lady Danbury's first name is Agatha. And then we have the series that everyone thinks of when they think of Julia Quinn, the Bridgerton series. I have a full book series review video on my channel if you want to go check it out. I talk about all 8 books in depth, but the series is definitely one of Julia Quinn's best. I mean, there is a reason why it is her most popular. I can't say hands down that this is my top favorite series from her, but it is really enjoyable. Overall, I would give the series 4 stars. The series does have the 1 5-star rating that I gave Julia Quinn. Book 1 and the one that was made into a Netflix show so far is The Duke and I. This is Simon and Daphne's story, and it's got this beautiful back cover on the original book. I'm not going to go too in depth with these because I talked about them for 30 minutes, but The Duke and I gave 3.5 stars, like 3.5 to 4 stars. It's a good start to the series, not my favorite. It's got the brother's best friend trope, fake dating with Daphne and Simon pretending to be courting so that Daphne can get better suitors and so Simon can get all the meddling mothers off his back. It's a fun story. It's a great introduction to the rest of the Bridgertons, but I was just really annoyed with Simon for a lot of this book, which is why I couldn't really give it a full 4 stars. Book 2 is The Viscount Who Loved Me. This is Anthony's book. Anthony is the oldest Bridgerton. He has essentially become the father figure to his younger siblings after the death of his father. This is what the 2-page step back looks like. Kate, the heroine, is probably my all-time favorite Julia Quinn heroine. heroine. I am a Kate stan. It's enemies to lovers, and I know I said I don't like enemies to lovers from Julia Quinn, and the whole enemies to lovers part of this book I honestly wasn't a fan of. I hated how Anthony was so condescending to Kate, but Kate made everything worth it. She is so strong, fierce, hilarious. She knows her mind and isn't afraid to speak it, so she was the one reason why I bumped this book from my original 3-star rating to 4 stars. Also, she's got a pet corgi named Newton, and I loved him. Book 3 is An Offer from a Gentleman. This is our Cinderella retelling, and it's Benedict's story. Here is the step back, and this story is one of my favorites in the series and from Julia Quinn. I gave this one 4 stars. It's a very, very solid read. I love the whole Cinderella retelling. Benedict and Sophie meet at this ball. They fall in love in this one night. She has to leave at midnight, and he never sees her again for 2 years. When they reunite, Sophie is now working as a housemaid, and Benedict doesn't recognize her. There's lots of good forced proximity here. Benedict does get sick, and Sophie helps take care of him. I did enjoy this one a lot, mainly because of how sweet Benedict is. He's charming, but not a rake like his older brother was, and like a ton of other Julia Quinn heroes are. He's just a really good guy, and I loved him for that. Book 4 is Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which was highly anticipated after the first 3 books. It's got the unrequited love trope because Penelope has been in love with her best friend's older brother Colin for a very long time. It's friends to lovers. Colin has always seen Penelope as a good friend until he finally comes back home after being away for several years and sees Penelope in a new light. I gave this one 4 stars. I did like it, but I think what really saved this book for me was that Penelope never really changed herself. By the time Colin came back home, she was still Penelope, and even though it took Colin a while to realize that, he did finally see her for her. Book 5, and my favorite book from Julia Quinn, is To Sir Philip with Love with This Step Back. This is the one and only book I gave 5 stars to from Julia Quinn. I love this book with all my heart. Surprisingly, a lot of people don't like this one. I can kind of see why, but I just loved the angst, the tortured hero, the grumpy sunshine trope. Philip is a single father who doesn't know how to be a father. It starts off being an epistolary romance with Philip and Eloise sending each other letters. Eloise finally goes to visit Philip when he asks her to marry him because he needs a mother for his children. It was just a really heartwarming read. I was hurting for Philip and his 2 kids, but also loved how much light and love Eloise brought into his life and into his children's lives. The ending was also perfection. I was just dying at how romantic it was. So this one, 5 stars, loved it. Book 6 is When He Was Wicked. I gave this one 3.5 to 4 stars. I did expect a little more from it, but I did like the whole unrequited love part because it was on the hero's part. He was in unrequited love with the heroine. Francesca is a widow. The hero is her late husband's cousin. So there's a slightly forbidden aspect to it, but I did really enjoy Francesca and Michael together. I loved Michael. Francesca did run a little bit too hot and cold for me, but I did love this theme. It is probably Julia Quinn's steamiest book, mainly because Michael knows what he's doing and is so eager to show Francesca everything. It's in His Kiss, book 7. I gave 3 stars to. It was the most disappointing of the series. This is Hyacinth's book. The main reason why it was disappointing was because I loved Hyacinth in the earlier books, but in her own book, she just fell flat. The hero, Gareth, was also pretty bland, though I did like the whole setup between them. Hyacinth is practically best friends with Lady Danbury. Gareth is her grandson. He needs help translating this diary he found. Hyacinth knows Italian, so they work together. I didn't really care too much about this one. It was pretty average for me. Didn't love it, didn't hate it, so 3 stars. The final book, and the book that surprised me the most, was On the Way to the Wedding, which is Gregory's book. Gregory is the youngest son. He believes in love, he wants to find love, and he thinks he's found love, except it's with the wrong person. Lucy is the best friend of the woman Gregory thinks is the love of his life. They become really good friends, though Lucy does start falling for Gregory, even knowing that he's in love with someone else. So this one, pretty angsty. I wasn't expecting it, but I loved it. I loved Lucy. I loved Gregory, especially after he finally got his head on straight and realized that Lucy was the one for him. So this one I gave 4.5 stars to. Hi everyone, I have to interrupt the video because I realized while I was editing that I just completely forgot to talk about one of Julia Quinn's books. I just completely skipped over the Bridgertons Happy Ever After, the bind-up of all the second epilogues, plus the bonus novella Violet in Bloom. I adored this book though. I loved seeing all these bonus scenes, revisiting the whole Bridgerton family. There are 8 novellas, really short novellas. They're basically like Where Are They Now type of stories. So if you love the Bridgertons, the couple, you will love reading this bind-up. I give it 4 stars overall, but I will say my favorite of the second epilogues is Francesca and Michael's. To my surprise, they're from book 6, When He Was Wicked. Their epilogue just hit differently than the rest of the epilogues and the rest of the couples, mainly because it was more focused on themselves and their love rather than some sort of external thing that the rest of the 7 epilogues were focused on. Even though Francesca and Michael weren't my favorite couple of the Bridgertons, I just loved their second epilogue because of how romantic and heartwarming it was. The way that Michael just loves and worships Francesca was chef's kiss. There is also the bonus novella at the end, Violet in Bloom, which tells the romance, the love story of Violet and Edmund, the Bridgerton parents. We get to see how they first met and fell in love, and it does end with the unfortunate death of Edmund from that bee sting. I really like this one, though I do wish we could have gotten a little bit more from it, but still this bind-up is perfect if you love the Bridgertons. Now back to the rest of the video. Julia Quinn then wrote some novellas for a couple anthologies. There were the 2 Lady Whistledown anthologies and also Where's My Hero. The first Lady Whistledown anthology is the further observations of Lady Whistledown. Julia Quinn's novella was the last one in this anthology, called 36 Valentines. This one was a great novella. I gave it 4 stars. We have a hero who was jilted by the man who was courting her. She finds out out of nowhere that he married someone else, and then she falls for his older brother. It was such a sweet novella. The hero here always knew that his younger brother wasn't good enough for the heroine. He's a bit of a stoic, unemotional kind of hero, but he shows a ton of emotion for the heroine. The second Lady Whistledown anthology is Lady Whistledown Strikes Back, and I love the novella from Julia Quinn here. I give it 4.5 stars. Her story is called The First Kiss, and I love the hero here. He is essentially a fortune hunter. He has no money. He came back home from war. He needs to marry an heiress, and the heroine has a huge dowry, but with her being the younger sister of his best friend, the best friend who died during war, he just can't take advantage of her. He had so much honor and love and respect for the heroine to take advantage for her growing feelings for him, even though he was also falling for her back. I just love this novella so much. Definitely my favorite novella from Julia Quinn. So good. For her other anthology, Where's My Hero, Julia Quinn wrote A Tale of Two Sisters. The hero here actually is connected to the Splendid trilogy. This one is an okay novella. It's a slightly forbidden romance. The hero falls for his fiance's sister. The engagement is supposed to be for a marriage of convenience. There are no feelings between the hero and the sister. Overall, it was an okay novella. I give it 3 stars. I didn't really love the main characters, but it was fine. The next series of hers is the Bevelstoke series. There are 3 books. This is another series where I hated one of the books, so I would give the series like a 3-star average, mainly because the bad one and the good ones balance out. Book 1 is The Secret Diaries of Miranda Cheever, and it's got this step back. I think it's the last book of hers that ever has a step back. If I'm wrong, someone let me know. But this book I hated. I gave it 1 star, although I think I gave it 2 stars in Goodreads, but I'm gonna lower it because the more I think about it, the more I don't like it. It's got the unrequited love trope, which I tend to hate and try to avoid, especially if the heroine is in unrequited love with the hero for a very long time, which is exactly what happens in Miranda Cheever. I just hated the main characters here. Turner and Miranda were the worst to read. It's the brother's best friend trope. They've known each other since they were kids, and from the moment that Turner kissed Miranda's hand as a kid, she's been in love with him. Now, as they're all grown up, they have become such pathetic main characters. Miranda is still in love with Turner for absolutely no reason. I really didn't see it. Plus, Turner went off to get married to someone else. Turner now has been ruined by his broken marriage, but honestly, he kind of brought that all on himself. I didn't feel any sympathy for him. He was so whiny, believing that his ex just ruined him for everything, for women, for love, for marriage. I was fed up with these two and just really hated them. Book 2, What Happens Times in London was a lot better, though I still didn't fully love it. I gave it 3.5 stars. I was initially really excited because my friend Lisa from Remarkably Lisa was telling me how cute the beginning was, and it was really adorable. Olivia and Harry are neighbors. Olivia has been spying on Harry because she thinks that he is this very mysterious man who may or may not have killed his fiance, so there's a lot of gossipy rumors going on. Olivia thinks that Harry is up to no good, especially after Harry catches Olivia spying on him and plays up the whole mystery man thing and does some crazy stuff while Olivia is watching him. Unfortunately, Harry is pretty boring. He does work for the War Office, but he just translates documents. Olivia is also that best friend, that sister from book 1. There was a little bit of cute banter, but I just didn't fall in love with Harry or Olivia. There's a little bit of action and intrigue towards the end of the book, which I really didn't care about. I mean, I don't really read Julia Quinn for intrigue and suspense. I just want the light and fluffy. So this one started off better than it ended. And then the third and last book is 10 Things I Love About You, which was my favorite of the series. I think what I loved most about this book was the fact that the hero Sebastian is the mysterious author of all these scandalous romances that all the Julia Quinn characters have been reading. He was so fun, charming, and sweet. He is a rake, but not in an annoying way that some of the previous rake heroes from Julia Quinn were. I much prefer her sweeter heroes than her player heroes, but Sebastian was still really great. The heroine Annabelle is actually set up with Sebastian's uncle, who holds the title, and he is not the greatest guy. I had a lot of fun with this one. It was so charming and sweet. I just loved how Sebastian was around Annabelle. This one was my favorite of the series. I gave it 4 stars. There's also the 2 Lady Most anthologies. Book 1 is the Lady Most Likely. What's really interesting about these anthologies is that they're not a collection of novellas, they're one cohesive story, but of course with 3 romances. I gave both the romances that Julia Quinn wrote in these anthologies 4 stars because they were just so cute, perfect for a novella. The first story in the Lady Most Likely has a heroine who is the belle of the season but is painfully shy. The hero was just perfect for her and her shyness. The second anthology, the Lady Most Willing, has a heroine who is kidnapped along with a couple other ladies to this Scottish castle. The hero is the Duke who was kidnapped right alongside with them because he was sleeping in the carriage that the ladies were thrown into. It was very cute and lots of fun. And then we have the Dukes of Wyndham duet, which is a very different vibe than the rest of Julia Quinn's books. It's more dramatic and a little bit angsty than lighthearted and fun, which is more Julia Quinn style. The first book, The Lost Duke of Wyndham, I gave 4.5 stars. I loved it. It took me by surprise. I really had no idea what to expect because not a lot of people talk about this duet. It's definitely more underrated compared to her other books, but I loved it. I love the drama. It was so juicy. We have a highwayman hero, Jack, who is about to steal from this carriage where the heroine is. She's a companion to this elderly grandmother, and the grandmother recognizes Jack and believes that he is her grandson and the true heir and Duke of Wyndham. This book is everyone trying to figure out if Jack is the real Duke, because if he is, then he'll have to replace the current Duke, Thomas. And then meanwhile, the romance is so sweet. Jack is the perfect charmer. He wants Grace, whether or not he's a Duke. He woos her and charms her, and I loved it. The sequel, Mr. Cavendish, I presume, was such a letdown. I give it 2 stars. I was not a fan. I had such high hopes because I loved book 1, and I was kind of hoping that the book would more be a sequel than a retelling of book 1. Sadly, it's just a recap of everything that happened in book 1, just told from Thomas's point of view, the current Duke of Wyndham, and his fiancée Amelia, who is supposed to marry him because he's the Duke. Going into this one, I was expecting Thomas to woo Amelia because in book 1, he took her for granted. He really didn't care about her. She was just there waiting for him. Thankfully, she didn't have feelings for him yet, but I still wanted Thomas to actually romance her a bit, but he doesn't. I really just didn't find the romance romantic at all. I was bored with everything that happened because I already knew what was gonna happen. So I feel like this book would have been better if it took place after the events of book 1 and just dealing with the aftermath. And then we have the Smythe Smith series. It's a 4-book series about the family that has been talked about so much, gossiped about, laughed at so much throughout all of Julia Quinn's books. The younger generation of the Smythe Smiths perform at this musicale every year, and it is just terrible for the ears. Book 1 is just like heaven. This one is very reminiscent of The Duke and I also gave this one 3.5 stars. It's a brother's best friend trope. It's cute, enjoyable for the most part. It's a very straightforward brother's best friend romance. I did like that Honoria and Marcus both had feelings for each other, and it wasn't just Honoria in unrequited love. The brother in the situation is mostly gone from the book, so Honoria and Marcus can get together without interference. Daniel, the brother, has been kicked out of the country because of an illegal duel. So overall, nothing mind-blowing, but still fun. Book 2 is actually Daniel's book. This book was my favorite of the series. I gave it 4 stars. It was just so sweet and adorable. It was very feel good, and it just made my heart so happy to read it. There's not that much drama considering Daniel got in this illegal duel. It is pretty insta-lovey, but I loved it. Daniel meets Anne and he wants her and needs her. He falls for the governess of his siblings, his cousins, pretty much on sight. It's the clash of the classes kind of romance. She's a governess, he's an earl. I did love that we finally get a non-versional heroine. Those are very, very rare from Julia Quinn. The Smith girls that Anne is in charge of are hilarious. They put on this play that was so much fun. It was just a really great read that had me smiling and laughing. Book 3 is The Sum of All Kisses, and it's about the guy that Daniel dueled and the reason why Daniel was kicked out of the country. Hugh challenged Daniel to an illegal duel. Hugh ended up getting his leg ruined, and then he ends up falling for Daniel's cousin, who hates him. It is kind of enemies to lovers, though Hugh did have some feelings for Sarah before the whole duel started, but I wasn't a big fan of their banter. Sarah came across as very shrewish, almost like a harpy. I don't know why Julia Quinn likes to write her heroines in this way, because it's not great, especially when the hero starts being condescending and thinking he knows better than the heroine, or thinks that the heroine is overreacting. This isn't only specifically about Hugh and Sarah, it's more in general with Julia Quinn books, because she does have a lot of banter in her books, but with the arguments it does get a bit much, and I hate the condescension from the heroes. So the romance here was very okay. I did like that Pall Mall is mentioned, and Lady Danbury and her grandson are also mentioned. The last book in the Smith series, and one of the worst books from Julia Quinn, is The Secrets of Sir Richard Kenworthy. This one was the worst because the hero was the worst, and it was so disappointing because it actually was starting off really great. The story just got completely ruined by Richard and what he did at the end. My rating for this book was 1 star. I hated it. The book starts off with Richard trying to find a bride he needs to marry for some reason. He meets Iris, who is one of the Smith cousins, and thinks that she would be the perfect bride, and actually starts to woo her. It is pretty sweet, the whole wooing and courtship, and Iris and Richard both start having feelings for each other. Iris is a bit of a wallflower, so she can't really believe that someone like Richard would want her, and it turns out there is an absolute trash reason for why Richard needs a bride. I could not believe that he had the audacity to do what he did, to almost make Iris do something she didn't want to do. He was just a trash hero and enough to ruin the book. And then finally we have Julia Quinn's latest series, the Rokesby series. The series is also the Bridgerton prequels. 3 of the books have Bridgerton main characters. Their generation is the generation before the other Bridgertons that we know and love. But the main family in the series are of course the Rokesbys, who are family friends of the Bridgertons. The series overall, I would give it 3.5 stars. It's fun but not the best, and not quite as good as the Bridgerton series. We have the 4 Rokesby siblings falling in love, and the first one is the oldest. Billy, the heroine, is one of the Bridgertons. She grew up with the Rokesbys and was really good friends with 2 of the younger brothers. Everyone expected her to marry one of them, but instead she falls in love with the one Rokesby that she can't stand. I'm giving this one 3 stars because the romance was okay. I did like Billy. I liked that she was independent, very strong. She was a great heroine, whereas George was a lot more mellow, so we did balance her out, but he was still a little bit boring. Book 2 in the series, The Girl with a Make-Believe Husband, was an improvement. It is the amnesia trope, which I do love reading. I give this one 4 stars, and it is my favorite of the series. This one is about Edward Rokesby, who's gone off to war. He gets hurt, he gets amnesia, and he wakes up to discover that he has a wife. He just doesn't remember he ever married her, and that's because he really didn't. Cecilia is pretending to be Edward's wife so that she can stay in America to discover what happened to her missing brother. So does have amnesia and the brother's best friend trope. The romance here was really sweet, even though there is some lying, but Edward is such a nice guy. I just really enjoyed this one, and if you love amnesia, you definitely need to read it. Book 3 is The Other Miss Bridgerton, and we've got another Bridgerton heroine. Poppy finds herself in the wrong place and the wrong time and gets herself kidnapped onto a ship. The hero is Andrew, one of the Rokesbys, who is pretending to be a sort of pirate, but he actually works for the government. There's a lot of forced proximity here. I mean, Poppy and Andrew are both stuck on the ship on this really tight space for like 2 weeks. I gave this one 3 to 3.5 stars because even though I did like the setup, it does drag a bit towards the middle because they're stuck on the ship and nothing happens. This is another book where there is some intrigue towards the end, but I did at least find myself invested this time. Still, I didn't really love Andrew and Poppy, though I did like that some characters from the Wyndham duet were mentioned. And also, Poppy is the cousin of the father of the Bridgertons. So if you're curious about the connection between those Bridgertons and these Bridgertons, that's the relationship. And then the 4th book in the series is First Comes Scandal. I gave this one 4 stars. It's friends to lovers, girl next door with a marriage of convenience. Georgiana, who is one of the Bridgertons, she needs to marry and Nicholas offers himself up. It is really cute and adorable, very feel good, even though not much really happens. I did love Georgie's cats, who were hilarious. Nicholas is studying to be a doctor, which was great. I was also loving that Georgie was learning alongside with him. And also, if you're a fan of the Bridgertons, baby Anthony, Benedict, and Cullen show up in this book. And then last from Julia Quinn is actually a novella in the 4 Weddings and a Sixpence anthology. I gave this novella 3 stars. The whole premise of this anthology is this group of girlfriends. While they're at boarding school, they find the sixpence and that brings them luck in love. So the heroine in the Julia Quinn novella puts a sixpence in her shoe. She gets a rude first impression with her hero, but then they keep running into each other again and eventually fall in love. It was cute but okay, so 3 stars. So those were my thoughts on every single Julia Quinn book, including her novellas. Even though I did enjoy a lot of them, I'm still very glad to be done. If you have read Julia Quinn before, let me know your thoughts. Even though she's not a top favorite author of mine, she still has some really good fun and lighthearted books. So keep an eye out for a more helpful guide to her books in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!